Flight 527 ready for departure.
Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. So in this video I'm building a brand new paludarium for a new species of vampire crab I acquired. So the tank is 45 litres or about 12 gallons, so that's 50 centimetres by 30 centimetres by 30 centimetres or 19.6 by 11.8 by 11.8 inches. For the base of this tank I'm not using leca this time, I'm going to be using media bags filled with gravel. This is quite a common situation you see with aquascaping and something that will work really well for this as well. You might have seen in my previous video, I think it's about 2 videos back, similar process and it worked very good. So I'm going to be using it again for this build. As always, I'm putting a little bit of glass protection down, which is just some old used aquarium matting. I generally do this when I'm using big rocks that could crack and break the glass quite easily. For the rocks this time, I'm just using generic black lava rock. This stuff gives a really good atmosphere, especially when I start adding the modules. It's going to give a really good sci-fi off-world kind of a look. As always, I start with the biggest rocks first and build a nice little barrier to keep the land and the soil section separated. Once I've got the big rocks in, I'll slowly start to add smaller rocks to fill in the gaps and add a bit more structure, texture, and some more details. This process always takes a long time, so I'll just skip ahead to when I finally got it finished, otherwise you'll be waiting here for a couple of days. So that's pretty much what I've come up with, though it is going to change a little bit once I start adding these modules. These 3D printed sci-fi modules are from Under. He's an aquascaper who I stumbled across over on YouTube a while ago, and he happily sent me a few of his prototypes to test for my vampire crab builds. And as soon as I saw them, I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and I knew they would work perfectly for a sci-fi style build for vampire crabs. I'll leave a link in the description to his original video, and another link to where you can grab some of these modules for yourself. Modules are also fully customizable and can be stacked in almost an endless amount of configurations, and you'll see some of the different ones that I've come up with as I work my way through this build. They're really cool and they do kind of remind me a little bit of playing with Lego. So after a few hours of messing around with these modules, I ended up coming up with 3 that I like that would work really well with my hardscape layout so far. So I'm going to start with one on the top left, one in the center, which I'm going to merge some rocks around, and then I'm going to have another one placed over on the far right. So this is the part that's going to vary quite a lot from my usual builds. Instead of filling the background with leca, I'm going to be using black basalt gravel for this. It's just a smaller grain stuff that's going to fit into the gaps a lot easier, and then we're going to build on top of that with our soil. For now, we're just going to fill in all the gaps to get a nice good base to work on. With all of the gaps filled at the back of the tank, it's time to add the front layer. So we're going to be using a fine black basalt sand for this. It's probably more of a gravel, somewhere between a gravel and a sand anyway. We're going to use a thin layer of that at the front of the tank. I'm not going to be planting any aquatic plants into the substrate this time, so it doesn't need to be really thick because it's not going to be holding any plant roots. It's also going to make life a lot easier for any of the future maintenance. At this part of the build, you have a choice. You can either fill it with water, add plants, and you've got an aquarium, or you can continue on down the Paludarium path and create a Paludarium in whatever style you like. Now for the most important part of the entire build, adding the soil. As always, I'm just going to be using a standard potting mix for this, just an organic thing. There's no need to use any fancy mixes unless you have some specific plants that require it. But otherwise, just normal soil works fine, as long as it doesn't contain any fertilizers. I'm also not going to need a weed matting layer for this. The gravel's dense enough to keep the soil out of it, and it's going to be quite a lot higher than usual. This will also make it a lot easier and quicker for the plants to get their roots down into the water section, keep the water nice and filtered. When you are adding your soil, try to make it at least 1 to 2 inches deep, as the crabs will dig and burrow into it. This is one of their primary places to hide and live. It's also easy to plant into when you've got about 2 inches of soil to work with. Normally I don't compress it too much, but this time around I'm going to compress the bottom half, just making it a little bit more dense, and then the top stuff I'm just going to lay on top. The soil is really quick and easy to add, so after the soil is in, normally I would add plants, but I'm doing things a little bit different this time, and the next thing I'm going to be adding is moss. So this is something I always add into my builds. It's cheap, easy to find, usually it's free, and it looks really good. Plus it's really adaptable in situations like this. For this build, the moss is going to be a mix of 3 different types of moss, so the standard Hypnum Moss, some star moss, and some cushion moss. Hypnum Moss is really tough and durable and it will last very well. However, the star moss and the cushion moss are a bit of a variable. I haven't really tried these successfully very often, but I found some quite close to my house, so I'm going to give it a go anyway and see how it works. I'm basically covering the entire build with moss this time, and I plan to let it grow and take over everything for about a month or 2. Then once it is established and takes hold, I'll be adding a nice selection of plants to the mix, as well as some aquatic life, some water, and then finally the crabs. But the next thing that goes into this tank will be springtails. Can't have a vampire crab tank without springtails, or any tank for a matter of fact. Springtails basically keep the entire ecosystem going, and they'll tackle any mold that pops up, eat any leftover foods, and just keep everything nice and stable and easy to look after. Normally I would add some isopods as well, but I'm not going to be adding any of those until sometime later on once I've got some plants. Now we wait, and if you haven't already subscribed, make sure you are, because you're going to miss out on part 2 if you don't.